So last week we talked about the Bengals and all the things going into Joe Burrow and is he living up to the hype so far? This week we're going to talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers. Is Big Ben going to be ready to go at the start of this season? Is that defense going to regress or impress in 2020? A lot of questions about the Pittsburgh Steelers. You know my thoughts about them, but let's get somebody who's a little bit closer to the situation's thoughts on them right after this. Real quick, guys, before this video starts, I want to make sure you hit that like button, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell so you can be notified when I upload. There's going to be a ton of AFC North training camp content coming out, and there's even a playlist on my channel where you can see all the coverage going out. I have all the Browns coverage and some AFC North camp check-ins, and this week is going to be no different. So if you want to make sure you're notified when that content drops, hit that subscribe button, ding that notification bell. So a lot of questions about the Pittsburgh Steelers coming into 2020, and I'm going to bring in somebody I work with on a weekly basis. He also works with the Locked On Network for the Pittsburgh Steelers on a weekly basis. If you want to see more interactions between me and my guest, Tony Serino, make sure you subscribe to the AFC North Talk YouTube channel where we talk about everything going on in the AFC North on the live stream on Monday. So make sure you're subscribed, make sure you're notified there too. But without further ado, Tony, how you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Happy to be here. Happy to talk Pittsburgh Steelers. We're getting ever closer to the start of the regular season, so I'm happy to talk Steelers with you today.
It is coming. It's less than a month away. But the first question I have to ask you, and I think the first question everybody has about the Pittsburgh Steelers going on so far is Big Ben. He's 38 years old, coming off that elbow injury. Some people think he's going to return to 2018 form. Some people think he's not. What are your thoughts on this, and what does it look like in camp so far?
Yeah, it's certainly been the talk. I mean, you talk to anyone outside of Steelers fans, and the first thing they want to talk about is Ben Roethlisberger. How does he look? And I understand it, right? Because the guy's coming off of elbow surgery. He's 38 years old. This is a big question mark for this team, and it was the big problem with this team in 2019 was the quarterback play. The first thing you think about with Ben is like, how does the arm look? Does he have the velocity? Is the spiral tight? Is he able to hit the deep ball? And early on in camp, it seemed like it's going to be fine from that. Tomlin talked about, look, I've seen his spiral tighter, but there's not really been a huge loss in velocity. That was the early reports. Then we got an interesting report from Mark Kaboly of The Athletic, who wrote an article saying that his throwing motion just looks a little different, right? And this is Mark Kaboly's been covering this team for 10, maybe 15 years, something like that. And so when you hear something like that, that immediately sets off some alarm bells, right? Because you're talking about elbow surgery. If his throwing motion is a little different, he really talked about the follow-through, right? His follow-through is not the same. Now, he did kind of put a whole bunch of caveats in there of like, look, I'm not saying the velocity's not there. I'm not saying he's not accurate. It's just that the throwing motion looks different. Could that be because of the elbow? He then wrote an article 2 days later saying, and he used like the most hyperbole, Quincy, that I've ever seen in an article about any Steeler player. Okay, I'm going to read some quotes here, okay, because it was about how accurate Ben Roethlisberger was during this practice. He said, wherever Roethlisberger wanted to throw the ball Wednesday, he threw it. It was like he was playing a game of darts and hit the middle of the bullseye every time. He was that accurate. We aren't talking about catchable balls here. We're talking about pinpoint accurate throws every time. So, you take that with the idea that his throwing motion is maybe a little different. I've always said, look, I expect Ben Roethlisberger will be back. I think he'll be fine as far as his arm goes. The questions for me about Ben are not about his arm. I think his arm is going to be okay. The questions are about the problems that he had in 2018, because you go back to that 2018 season, yes, he led the league in yards. He also led the league in interceptions. He made some really dumb mistakes that year. We can go back to that game week 1 against the Browns where Denzel Ward had a great interception, but it was a really dumb throw on Ben Roethlisberger's part. And those kind of problems for Ben, the decision-making plus the accuracy have been the issues in years past. That's why he's had 10-plus interceptions in his last 3 or 4 years. That's what he's got to improve on for me. And I don't think that's not a question about the elbow. That's just a question about decision-making. Now, the accuracy part, some people say, well, the elbow was a part of that, the pain that he had in his elbow. But even if you believe that, if he's had the pain in his elbow for a year or maybe even 2, he's thrown 10-plus interceptions 40 years in a row. So that doesn't explain all of that. That to me is the big concern about Ben is, can he get that interception number back down into the single digits?
So with him being at, a older age for an NFL quarterback, but not necessarily the oldest age, do you think him improving is something that's going to be in the cards for him?
I'm not looking to see improvement. No, I don't think we're going to see a better season out of him than we saw in 2018 from like a numbers perspective, even from an attempts perspective. Look, the guy threw nearly 700 times in 2018. I think that probably had a lot to do with the fact that his elbow was deteriorating over that time, and so. I think what the Steelers are going to be looking for out of Ben Roethlisberger this year is just that kind of veteran leadership. I keep comparing him to that final year of Peyton Manning. And I know Peyton Manning's arm in that year was shot, right? He was done, and Brock Osweiler came in at times and looked better than Peyton. But the reason why the Broncos went with Peyton that year over Brock Osweiler was because of that kind of veteran playmaking ability that Peyton Manning had at certain times. I think that's what the Steelers are really going to be banking on this year. They're probably going to go more run heavy than they've been in recent years with Ben Roethlisberger in the lineup. But I still think they're going to be looking for those moments like 3rd and 7 when you weren't last year. There was no way Mason Rudolph or Duck Hodges were converting those with any sort of regularity. You're looking for Ben Roethlisberger to come in those situations, in those big red zone opportunities to make the big throws that he can. I think that's where the Steelers are going to improve in 2020. But as far as like Ben Roethlisberger looking the best he's ever looked, and I know, of course, the stories have already been written about how Ben is lighter than he's been in 14 years. The arm looks better than it ever has. All of that is camp talk, right? What the Steelers need out of Ben Roethlisberger is a guy who can come in, who can make some plays here and there. They still have a great defense. They just need a guy who can make the play every once in a while, and that's all they're going to be counting on out of Ben this year.
You touched on something I think is very interesting with the Steelers, right? Because my biggest concern with the Steelers kind of bringing back Big Ben at this age is, the offense is usually 40 attempts per game. Big Ben usually is up there in the top 5 when it comes to most attempts in the NFL. And I'm wondering, has the Steelers truly made that adjustment to how that offense is going to look with Big Ben? Have you heard anything from that end that they're going to make that adjustment, run more?
I think they will. I mean, again, it's hard to say at camp right now because the Steelers are being so secretive when it comes to anything that involves team drills, right? Even 7-on-7, they won't allow anything to be reported on that's not in the practice report. 11-on-11, I mean, forget about it. But let's just look at the moves that they've made this offseason. So they bring in the first free agent that they signed was Derek Watt, a fullback from the Chargers. Now, they've had Roosevelt Nixon in recent years, but he had a knee injury that kept him out. And so the Steelers are probably going to go back to using a fullback. Now, that does lead you to believe that that they want to run the ball a little more. They brought in Benny Snell last year as a compliment to James Conner. He ended up actually taking over because James Conner had so many injury concerns. They brought in Eric Ebron, who I know is more of a receiving threat. But if you read the reports out of camp, Mike Tomlin has been at the tight end blocking drill every single day, watching those tight ends and specifically watching Eric Ebron in that drill. They are trying to get this guy to be a better blocker because I think this team wants to use more 2 tight end sets. They want to use a fullback. They want to go more ground and pound this year. They have James Conner. They have Benny Snell. They also added Anthony McFarland in the draft, more of a speedster in that room. I think they do definitely want to run the ball. Art Rooney said this in his closing press conference to the 2019 season that they need to get better in the running game in 2020. When your owner is going out there and saying, this is what we got to do better, the organization is going to follow suit. So I think they do want to run the ball. As far as have I heard the reports in camp, the Steelers are being very secretive this year, so it's tough to say. But I think we will definitely see this team running the ball considerably more than we've seen it in previous years with Ben.
So let's just go down that lane and say they do change the offense a little bit. What are your thoughts on this supporting cast? Because I don't think this is one of the stronger supporting casts that Big Ben has had, in my opinion. I mean, obviously, when you compare it to like Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, Juju Smith-Schuster, those are insane supporting casts. But this year, even, if you account for the lack of those type of guys, it doesn't look like it's the accumulation of absolute playmakers around Ben that he's usually surrounded himself with. And with the Steelers kind of putting themselves in a position to rely on those guys more, how do you feel like that's going to fare? Or is there somebody you think is going to really step up and make themselves, one of those guys?
I've been a huge believer in Deontay Johnson ever since I saw him in training camp last year. I think he's a phenomenal route runner, and I think what he showed in the regular season last year is that translates not just from the practice field, but onto the game situations, even with quarterbacks. Like, remember, he didn't really play with Ben. He played with Mason, and he played with Duck, and he was very good in those situations. He's a good run after catch guy. I've liked him a lot. I really expect that he's going to step up this year. But the questions are all about, can he get on the same page with Ben Roethlisberger? That's been the problem. You go back to James Washington's rookie year, everybody raved about him at training camp, and myself included, about the combat catches. Joe Hayden was so impressed with him. And James Washington did absolutely nothing his rookie year because he never got on the same page with Ben. So that's a big question mark for me early on. And I think it's one thing that Ben Roethlisberger knows about himself, right? That he has to be better about working these rookies into the offense. He's worked a lot with Chase Claypool during this training camp. But you talk about the surrounding cast. Now, yes, it's not. This is not the killer bees. That's for sure. There's no killer bees in Pittsburgh anymore. It's just Ben Roethlisberger and Chris Boswell. No, I think there's a lot of question marks around surrounding the entire offense. Okay, if you go to the running back position, James Conner was a very good runner when he was healthy. But that's the big question with him. Can he stay healthy? And it's an open question. We're not, again, you're not going to learn anything in training camp about a guy's durability. Again, then you go to the wide receiver room. Juju's coming off of his career worst year. Now, I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that the Steelers' passing game last year was atrocious, but he still had a career worst year, and he had some injury concerns. So there's still a question about whether or not he can be a true number one. There's questions about James Washington and whether or not he can have that same kind of production that he had last year. Can he do that with Ben Roethlisberger, where he didn't his rookie year? Eric Ebron comes in, but there's a ton of question marks about whether or not this is 2017 Eric Ebron or this is going to be 2019 Eric Ebron, because those are two very different players. And then Vance McDonald, again, Vance McDonald I've liked a lot, but much like the rest of the offense last year, not a good player. And even on the offensive line, you would say there's some question marks, because the Steelers are moving that offensive line around with Matt Filer going to left guard, and it looks like Chuks Okorafor is going to come in at right tackle. So yeah, there's a ton of question marks. I agree with you. I like the unit overall because I like the youth of it. I like the pure talent. But look, speaking to a Browns fan here, right? You just putting a bunch of talent out there is one thing. Those guys have to gel. Those guys have to come together. And that's the big question mark for me. I think it's going to take some time this year without a preseason, without any mini camps and everything, with this being basically 14 padded practices between the start of camp and the start of the regular season. There's a big question about whether or not this offense can come together that quickly.
One of the things that's not a question about this Steelers team is their defense. We know they're going to be good at the very least. Now, how good they're going to be, some people have some questions. It seemed like they didn't end 2019 on the highest of notes in the world. I've beaten you over the head with how they've ended the season plenty of time. I'm not going to do it again today. But for this Steelers defense, what do you see the future being for them? Are they going to impress this year, or are they going to regress?
So they returned essentially all 11 starters. I know people come in and say, no, they're returning 10 of 11 because Javon Hargrave started last year in place of an injured Stephon Tuitt, but they get Tuitt back, right? So, and Tuitt was fantastic at the beginning of last year. So they're going to return basically everyone from that defense. But I maintain this all off season. I do expect to see some regression. Just because if you look at in analytics, I think has done a very good job of this, of showing how defenses, they kind of ebb and flow throughout years and even throughout games. You don't see dominant defense last over time, right? Defenses will kind of ebb and flow, especially a defense like the Steelers last year that was so reliant on turnover. The Steelers, I believe, had 38 takeaways last year. They're not going to have 38 takeaways in 2020. I mean, this just they had the best fumble recovery rate of any team in football. That's just not going to happen again in 2020. So I do expect some regression in that aspect. I think this team cannot be so reliant on turnover. They won't be. Now, as far as play on the field, I think the big question mark that I have going into this year, and it's actually a bigger worry than I have than even Ben Roethlisberger, which is how much regression are we actually going to see from this defense? Because the other knock you could say about this defense, they didn't really play anybody last year. They didn't play the Chiefs. They didn't really play any. In fact, they didn't really play any of the top offenses in the NFL, save for Lamar Jackson. But I think, and I know this, it's funny because on AFC North Talk, I'm known as the Steelers homer, right? I'm defending every player. If you go talk to the fans of Locked On Steelers, they used to call me Tony the Hater, okay? Because I would come in with a whole bunch of hot takes against the Steelers, and this is going to be another one of them, right? Look, I know the Steelers shut down Lamar Jackson last year. They did. They had 2 interceptions. It was a good game for them. But that was before Lamar Jackson and that offense really gelled. I look at that game that Lamar had last year against Seattle as the real turning point for that offense. The Steelers played them before that. And then the last game of the year, was RG3, so they didn't get to play him again. I was really hoping last year the Steelers would sneak in the playoffs, that they would be able to play one of the top offenses in the league. I thought that defense deserved it because they played so well last year. I mean, they were shut down in basically every game. But again, they didn't play those top offenses. So what's that going to look like this year when they do go up against some of those better teams? It's an open question. I think this defense is going to be good. I think they're still going to be a top 5 defense. I don't know that they're going to rise to the level they were last year. But again, I don't think they need to. It's just a question for me of how far do they regress this year, especially when it comes to those turnovers. If this is a team that goes from 38 takeaways to 22, that's 1 turnover a game, right, that you're not getting. What does that do to this team? What does that do to this defense? we'll see.
So much is known about how the Steelers do things, but what I think is going to be interesting about this year is that there's going to be a lot of surprises, and I think that can come from a lot of different directions. Who do you think are going to be the surprises of the Pittsburgh Steelers come 2020?
The real surprise for me, and really the surprise for everyone throughout camp so far, has been Ryan Switzer. Because here's a guy who has basically been the butt of every joke in Pittsburgh for the last year. And it really stems from that, the text message that Ben Roethlisberger sent to Switzer during that Super Bowl. It was Steelers-Patriots, where he said he's watching Brady and Edelman, and he says, why can't this be us? And that, of course, got a lot of play, and everyone expected that Switzer and Ben were going to be great in 2019. Now, obviously all that stopped when Ben went down. But even if you go back to the first 2 games of the year, Switzer and Ben were never on the same page. I mean, they just, they were never going to be Brady and Edelman. The problem here, Quincy, is that Ryan Switzer reads the comments, okay? He read everything that got said this offseason because this guy came into camp absolutely ripped. By all reports, I mean, he is in terrific shape. Now, will he find a role on this team? Okay, here's what I'll say about Ryan Switzer, right? The player that I watched at camp last year. Good route runner, really good route runner. Okay, and that shows up when you watch him. The problem for him, and what you can't really replicate in a training camp situation, he has no run after catch. I mean, the guy has 0 run after catch, and that's been a real problem for him. He's not going to win 50-50 balls. Okay, and even if you get him in space, the moment a defender gets around him, he's going down. That's what you don't want out of your slot receiver. You got to get that guy in open space, and you got to make that guy be more of a playmaker. So where can he find a role in this team? I think he's going to find a role because he's such good friends with Ben. He's got a great rapport with Ben off the field. Can they replicate that on the field remains to be seen. But I think he will still be the backup slot receiver on this team. If you imagine that's going to be Deontay Johnson on one side, James Washington on the other, Juju in the slot. If there were to be any sort of injury there, even if an injury on the outside, they would move Juju to the outside and then put Ryan Switzer in the slot. So I think Switzer has a role. Well, how big is that role going to be? Who's going to be the surprise? Or is he going to be the surprise? He's been the surprise at camp. I don't know that he's going to be the surprise in the regular season. To me, right now, I think it probably will be Ebron if we're talking about the big names who are going to have kind of the bigger numbers than maybe expected. I think the Steelers are preparing for a season where they can let Ben and Ebron do their thing, and he can be kind of a safety valve for Ben in a year where Ben's trying to reacclimate himself to the speed of NFL play after a year off. The other guy I would mention here is Chase Claypool, the second-round pick, who I did not expect to see a lot of playing time this year. Seems like they really want to use him in the red zone in those jump ball situations. I think you can expect him to have a big year in those ways. I think maybe if you see maybe 4 or 5 touchdowns out of Claypool this year, that would not surprise me, especially if they're all in those red zone areas. So those are the guys I'll look for.
All right, guys, a lot of great information there from Tony. And again, if you want to hear more from Tony or just more from the group overall, we have Ace, we have SZG Sports, we have Tony, we have me every Monday live. Check it out. If you want to see more from us there, make sure you subscribe to AFC North Talk. And if you want to see more of Tony, make sure you follow Locked On Steelers on Spotify, Apple Music, wherever podcasts are. They are there. He does a weekly drop on Locked On Steelers every Tuesday, so check it out. But again, guys, I want to thank Tony for being on here. Tony, you want anything else you want to say before you go off?
It's been fun. It's been a lot of fun. It's gonna be a lot more fun as we continue this on AFC North Talk in the coming weeks. I'm looking forward to the season getting started because there's no look. The training camp so far, it's fun to talk training camp, but boy, teams are being so secretive this year. And then when there's no preseason, so just counting down the days to the start of that regular season.
Everybody's being secretive except for the Browns, who are live streaming every practice for 2 hours straight. Hey, I love it. I love that I get to watch all of that, and it gets a lot of great content out. But again, guys, thank you guys for watching. Have a great day. Have a good night.